Stories Bring Us Together, interviews with authors and illustrators of great reads selected by Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine Centers for the Book. Featuring the Altogether Quilt from Connecticut, illustrated and authored by Lizzy Rockwell, The Most Costly Journey from Vermont with co-editor and cartoonist Marek Bennett, BLUE from Maine, illustrated by Daniel Minter, and The Civil War Diary of Freeman Colby from New Hampshire with author and cartoonist Marek Bennett.
Hello, I'm Lizz Sinclair of the Maine Center for the Book. As a state center, we're affiliated with the Library of Congress's Center for the Book in Washington, D.C. The mission of the Center for the Book is to promote books, reading, libraries, and literacy, with a special emphasis on promoting the unique literary heritage and traditions of each state and each territory. The authors and the illustrators that are on this video are from some of the eastern states. Their books were selected by the affiliate Centers for the Book to represent their state's literary heritage. These great reads from great places are chosen every year by affiliate centers. In fact, if you're curious, you can see a list of all the books selected for this year and in previous years at the website www.read.gov/greatreads. We're so grateful for the authors and illustrators who are joining us today. They will be here to discuss their work, and as they do that, they'll also be addressing the theme of this year's National Book Festival, Books Bring Us Together. I hope you'll enjoy these conversations and that it will spark an interest in listening to all of the conversations with authors and illustrators in the Great Reads videos. Together, they are a testament to the richness and the diversity of this nation's literary creativity. We're going to start off with the state of Connecticut. The Connecticut Center for the Book has selected the book, The All-Together Quilt by Lizzy Rockwell as their book for this year. Lizzy, we are so delighted to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. Why don't you get us started off by telling us a little bit about your book?
Thank you so much for having me, Liz. I'm delighted to be here. And I am the author and illustrator of The All-Together Quilt, which I was very honored that the Connecticut Center for the Book selected as its Best Picture book of 2021. And this book is about a group of adults and kids who meet at the community center on Fridays and make a quilt together. And they don't start out with a concept of the finished quilt. They work towards a finished product improvisationally and collaboratively. And this book is based on a real experience that I've been having for the past 14 years with the quilters of Piece by Piece in Norwalk, Connecticut. And the book is published by Random House, actually Alfred A. Knopf, imprint of Random House. And my editor was Nancy Sisko, and my art director was Sarah Hopkins.
Fantastic, Lizzy. I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about the National Book Festival's theme, Books Bring Us Together. So we're really curious about what that theme means to you and what your hopes are for how your book might bring us together.
Well, it's really kind of a perfect theme for this book. Not every book I've done has the word together in the title, but this book is about a very diverse intergenerational group of people who come together and gather in a community center and collaborate and learn from each other and tell one another their stories, because that's the nature of quilting. A lot of it is slow, and there's option to converse, and so it literally brings people together, just like the patchwork of a quilt comes together. And so the quilters themselves are a metaphor for that community. And the quilt is a metaphor for the community as well. And we actually made the quilt in real life.
Oh, wow.
And the quilters at Piece by Piece gave their handprints and they sat at the frame and stitched it just like they're doing on the cover of the book. And this is a calendar that I make every year for the quilters. And these are just a few of the many dozens of people I've worked with over the years. Some of the elders have worked with me for almost the entire 14 years we've been doing this. So I just attended by Zoom a church service at a Unitarian church in Athens, Georgia, where they were using the book as part of their sermon about community and about an intergenerational quilting project that they had done with their youth group to make the young people who are graduating and leaving home a quilt to take with them. So I've been getting beautiful anecdotes from people around the country, brownie troops and quilt guilds and churches that are inspired by the book, and it literally is bringing them together around quilting, which is, you only hope that will happen with a book you put out there in the world, you know, in your lonely little cubicle here, and then you release it to the world and you hear back that it did make a difference and it did inspire people. So it's a nice feeling.
Lizzy, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's great to see the quilt too. It sounds like the whole process of bringing people together or people coming together to make the quilts, you piecing together this story and then sending it out into the world has just been incredible. Lizzy, why do you think this is an important story for you to tell?
One of the reasons I created Piece by Piece, the Norwalk Community Quilt Project, was because I'd been teaching in after-school programs for about 10 years, and I knew there was a foundation sponsoring projects to better the lives of youth in the city. And I knew that handcraft, from my own experience as a child, was a really slow, meditative way to center yourself, and handcrafts that you do with others not only center yourself, but they connect you to other people. So it's just a really holistic benefit. And another thing I wanted the project to accomplish was to put a light on people whose lives were too often not highlighted. And so we have made 9 quilts that have gone into public places. Like in the book, they make a quilt that goes to the library. And then there's a big unveiling and people are taking pictures and clapping. And so this portion of the Piece by Piece experience, where we unveil quilts in public places like libraries and a children's museum, et cetera, gives people so much pride. And my friend Viola Sears is 93 years old, and she will not miss a public quilting bee or an unveiling, no matter what's going on. And so I knew that if I made a book that was about these real people, the actual names and faces of my friends, that they would feel very proud to be highlighted and to be part of a church service in a Unitarian church in Athens, Georgia, or, you know, talked about in schools and libraries. So that was a really beautiful motive for me to shine a light on this community that I love so much.
Oh, Lizzy, that's so powerful. You know, it's wonderful that you are uplifting the power of being together in person to create things for a specific place, but doing that together. And as you're doing that, sharing your stories and sharing of yourselves, and then, you know, how this is uplifting that and then inspiring other communities to do the same thing, or even just uplifting the communities that are doing that but hadn't been heard about. So it's just wonderful to see how all of the different levels of community that are being brought together in this. Lizzy, I have one more question to ask you. What is it about Connecticut that is really special to you? What do you find really unique about Connecticut?
I think one of my favorite things about the state is its diversity. I live in suburban areas of the tri-state area of New York City. I'm a born Manhattanite, but I've lived in Connecticut most of my life. And we just have people from all over the world living here. And my children went to really diverse schools, and it's just a very normal environment for me. Along with that, I do have to say, I love living near water because I'm a swimmer and a bird watcher and a canoeer. And so we have beautiful Long Island Sound and ponds and, beautiful trails, very close to, the Metro North train that could get me in the city for a show at the MoMA in an hour and a half. So it's a great place to live.
Lizzy, thank you so much for being here and talking about your book. It's been really exciting to hear some of the ripple effects that it's having. And thank you so much for putting that book out there. We're now going to turn to Vermont Center for the Books selection, The Most Costly Journey. It's a book that Marek Bennett has been involved in as an editor and as one of the cartoonists. I think this book is another one that will have a bit of a ripple effect as more and more people read it. Marek, thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. The Most Costly Journey is a big collaboration between about 16 artists and over 20 storytellers and clinical workers from a county free clinic and ethnographers and anthropologists from Vermont Folklife Center and UVM. And we all work together to produce a book that documents the narratives of migrant farm workers who live here in New England and participate in the agricultural system of New England, but in most cases are undocumented and in many cases don't even speak English. So we're documenting their stories, pairing each storyteller with a cartoonist who helps them draw a short comic book that documents some aspect of the migrant farm worker experience.
That's fascinating. One thing that we asked Lizzy and some other folks is we're talking about the National Book Festival's theme, Books Bring Us Together. So Marek, what does the theme mean to you, and what are your hopes for how this book could bring us together?
Well, this project works on a lot of levels with that theme. From my own experience, it brought me together with storytellers that I worked with to create comics. The result, of course, is something that no one of us could have produced alone. So that collaboration is really special to me as an artist. And as a New Englander who grew up in New Hampshire and Vermont and spends a lot of my time here, it brings me together with other people in my community that I don't otherwise cross paths with. And from the beginning, the main goal of the whole project at the outset was actually to help people tell their stories. It's a project, it's a work of graphic medicine. So it's to help people create a narrative of healing and tell their stories for other people in similar situations who maybe can learn from those stories and identify with those stories and get information and get help with anything they need help with. So the clinic, the Open Door Clinic in Middlebury, Vermont, used the comics in the original Spanish language versions to share with other migrant farm workers. And that was the first bringing together of the project, that the comics went out in a readable form during farm visits and were available at the clinic. And then the later phase of the project, the English language version, which is what this book is another kind of bringing together, because now the stories are going outside the migrant community and they are helping people, like I said, like me, who I'm not a member of the migrant farm worker community, and it helps me get a vision into what that life is like and to see that as part of the fabric of New England and part of the fabric of our economy. and to see that human experience and that process of graphic medicine and healing and narrative is a part of all our communities.
That's fantastic. And I love the dual communities that were brought together, people being able to tell their stories and share them, and then have them lifted up and shared with other people in their community and with maybe with similar experiences. And then the English version being able to get those stories out to other folks, to be able to hear about the experience of people's lives, basically, who they may not have a chance to hear from normally. That's really powerful. What do you think that comics or illustrations do for bringing people together like this?
Well, we're all cartoonists in one way or another in this project, and we all work in comics. So we work with art styles that reduce detail down to basic ideas. And some of the artists work in a very detailed style, and some of mine I did in my sort of stick figure cartooning style. But the most important thing was that the artistic style was, the storyteller had the final say. So the artistic style had to reflect their intentions. How do you want to be portrayed in your story? And if they wanted something a little different, we had to change the style. So that, that collaborative process really, that's the first act of coming together, right? And figuring out what we all agree on and what we want to portray as part of the narrative. And I think as comics creators, all we do to create narrative is stitch together one image after another, whether it's page by page or whether it's many panels on a page. We're kind of stitching that together and then and making sure it's done in such a way that the reader can move from one image to another and get the story. And the result is always more than just the sum of the images or the sum of the words, right? So the fact that you're moving across borders and going from panel to panel is an essential part of the art form. In fact, that's where the heart of the story is, right? That we're kind of migrating from panel to panel, page to page. So I think that just that act that we're constantly crossing borders and we're constantly moving into somebody else's part of the narrative as part of the art form is very different from a photograph or a painting or a single image, to catch a moment. There's kind of a recognition that narrative and communities and human experience comes from reaching out and going somewhere else. And that I just became more and more aware of that in the medium as I worked with storytellers and worked on these stories. So I love that it casts light on that just in the art form itself.
I never thought about that. And the whole idea of when you were saying crossing borders as you're going through the story, I mean, it's amazing how that's exactly what you're doing. Again, with this book and collection, the metaphor of crossing borders is just it's a powerful one.
I like how we started off thinking, well, if you recognize yourself in the story, you'll be compelled to read it. That was kind of the fundamental idea that kicked it off. And Julia, my co-editor, there's Julia Grand Doucette of Open Door Clinic and Teresa Mares of UVM and Andy Clovis of Vermont Folklife Center are my co-editors. And they come from different directions and they have different perspectives on the project, I know. But one of the things that Julia says is she started the project because her idea was that farm workers could recognize themselves in the stories and would gravitate towards seeing these stories. But the fact that they were visual means farm workers, many of whom, for a number of them, Spanish is not their first language. They may speak an indigenous language, and Spanish is only learned from school if they went to school. And many others didn't go to much school, so they might not have, a graduate level reading degree, reading level, but the comics bring the story to you regardless of your reading level. And kids and adults can read the same comic and get lots out of it. So that's one of the ideas. Like the foundational idea was you would see yourself in the story and be drawn to it. And I like how now that the project has progressed and we put it together as a book, for me, one of the most interesting ideas is that you see somebody else who looks different and has a different experience, but by moving across those borders with them and moving through the panels and pages with them, you travel along with them. You're literally moving through space to read a comic. That's the only way to get it. It's bringing you together in the narrative, in the trajectory of the story.
It's fantastic. And this was published by the Vermont Folklife Center, is that correct?
Yes, and it's currently out in the Vermont Reads edition through Vermont Humanities. So it's available to all public libraries in Vermont to do reading groups with and discussions. And they have a lot of programs for it too.
Super for all of you in Vermont. There are a lot of opportunities to engage in this book. Thank you so much, Marek, for being with us today. We really appreciate the time, and for both you and Lizzy, really appreciate you taking just telling your stories, not actually your stories, but making room for these stories to be told and shared with everyone. Thank you for all that you're doing for your state, and thank you for the gift that you're giving all of us. Appreciate it. From Vermont, we'll move to the next state, which is Maine, close to my heart. We at the Maine Center for the Book have selected the book Blue, A History of the Color as Deep as the Sea and as Wide as the Sky. Here it is. It was written by Nane Akua Brew Hammond, and it was illustrated by Maine artist Daniel Minter. Daniel is a recipient of the Coretta Scott King Illustration Honor, as well as the Caldecott Honor. So first, Daniel, we are so proud to have Blue and to have you representing Maine at the National Book Festival. And we're grateful for the opportunity to talk with you about the book. So what's interesting, while the other books that were selected by centers tell the story of individuals, this book tells a different kind of story. It's a story of a color. Will you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes, and thank you for having me. And what you say that it does not tell the story about an individual is one of the things that attracted me to this book. You know, it's not, there's no central character. The central character is really the color blue. And it also has a science aspect to it. It has a historical aspect to it. So it was really interesting to me to just really jump right into this book and then find a way to make it, you know, a consistent story through pictures, you know, to bring to make each little vignette, you know, sort of its own story, and then connect them all at the same time.
You know, that's something that I noticed, Daniel, like the written narrative and the illustrations together tell the story of Blue so well, and they're so integral to each other. I'm wondering how much you and the author worked together on this.
You know, we did not work together at all as far as, you know, exchanging ideas about what we were doing. I received the manuscript and went from the text, and that's something that I always prefer to do. I would rather respond to the text than respond to verbal input. So really, you know, Nana, you know, finished the manuscript and basically, left the images to me. And that way I feel like it was a complete collaboration, you know, whereas we both were able to concentrate on the areas where we felt our strength lie.
That's wonderful. Daniel, how do you decide what books you'd like to take on as a project?
That's interesting too, because I like books that have aspects of multiple things that are not that are able to teach you something, that are able to spur your imagination, and that also able to show you something beautiful about the world.
You know, Daniel, I'm familiar with a lot of your artwork and other illustrations you've done for books. And one thing that I've enjoyed immensely and also noticed is that there are so many patterns involved in your work, that they appear sometimes in white outlines. Sometimes the same patterns repeat throughout a piece. Sometimes some different patterns are entered in. Could you talk to us about why patterns are so important for you in your work?
Well, this book, Blue, was perfect for me to work in that way. One of the ways that I work in just about all of my work is I work in layers and levels, and so the figurative narrative piece that is dominant carries the main narrative. And then I use patterns and textures to add another layer of narrative within that. So a lot of times you'll see the lines, you'll see or different patterns repeating throughout, and those patterns are relaying a complementary narrative to the story.
They're beautiful and haunting in some cases in this book. They do draw me in so much deeper into what the narrative is and into the visual aspect of the books. I love them.
Thank you.
Hey, Daniel, so
yes.
The National Book Festival's theme this year is Books Bring Us Together. I'm wondering, what does that theme mean to you, and what are your hopes for how your book, this book, and other books that you work on could bring us together?
Well, like I was saying, I like books that teach us something, that can show us something beautiful about the world. And generally, not generally young people, but not just young people, are always looking for those kinds of things. They're looking to be inspired. They're looking to learn something about the natural world around them. And they're looking to learn something about what has happened in the world before. So, I'm just interested in books that touch on those types of things. And those are also the types of things that I feel bring people together. Those are the kinds of things that people enjoy sharing about themselves. People enjoy sharing, their histories, their diverse backgrounds. They enjoy sharing, the similarities and differences, within the way they grew up, within the way their families are structured. Those things, when they are in books, we realize that we do not live in a monolithic world. We do not live in a homogeneous world. We live in a world of many different influences and backgrounds and cultures. And we also, by having books like that, we also learn that the people next to us, the people next to us are, they are very similar to us, and yet they are very different at the same time.
Yes. Was there a book that meant a lot to you when you were growing up, Daniel? And if you can think of one to give us an example, can you tell us why it meant so much to you?
You mean you mean just any book in general, or just a children's book?
Any book you want to pick from growing up.
Well, I would have to say it would be, the writings of Zora Neale Hurston. I grew up in South Georgia, And the schools were still segregated. We did not have we did not have access to books with children in them that looked like us. It was not a common thing. So when I was young, my older sister discovered a book of short stories by Zora Neale Hurston. And that book, the dialect in which Zora Neale Hurston wrote was so familiar to me. It sounded like people I knew. The tones and the rhythms were very familiar to me. I knew those. I knew that they were slang. I knew that. But just seeing them written made such an impact on me. It gave me the sense that, that the events that were happening around my small community and the interactions of the people were just as important as the events that are, recorded in books anywhere. So I feel like that book, the writings and stories of Zora Neale Hurston and the way she approached it and the way she told stories about her people really influenced me more than I can say right here.
Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and about how you're working with an author and how you're thinking about your work. And also just about the book that was really important to you when you were growing up.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about my perspective in the artwork. But I really appreciate the way that I'm able to share my thoughts and views on my artwork through this. Okay. So thank you.
We're going to end these sets of interviews with New Hampshire Center for the Book selection for the book festival this year, which is The Civil War Diary of Freeman Colby. It's a graphic novel series by none other than cartoonist Marek Bennett. So Marek, it's good to have you back here. And boy, have you been busy. It's wonderful to see your work. Now, this is the story of a New Hampshire school teacher who enlisted in the Union Army during the Civil War. Would you tell us about this series?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for asking about it and featuring it. This is a project that came about partly by accident. I, for years, had been interested in the Civil War, partly through New Hampshire history and partly just through personal interest in history. And I was at the local historical society here in Connecticut Valley, New Hampshire, Henniker Historical Society one day, and I was just poking around and out of a box, I kind of stumbled across a 40-page typed transcript labeled Diary of Freeman E. Colby. And something about it kind of caught my eye. It seemed kind of mysterious, and I started reading it, and I realized it was the typed transcript of a diary or a memoir, really, written by a school teacher from my hometown who had joined in the middle of the Civil War, summer of 1862, joined the Union Army and fought for about 3 years in the Civil War. And I just got really interested and curious because I grew up here in town, and I wondered how it was that I'd never really learned this story and never heard about it. It's been in the Historical Society for maybe 100 years up on a shelf somewhere. And I just felt like that story needed to come off the shelf and get seen somehow. And so my first thought as a cartoonist was to draw it, but then I couldn't find any photographs of Freeman Colby. And working on this about 10 years now, I still have never come across a photograph of him. So the challenge became, how do you draw something that you've never seen? How do you draw something that I can't really imagine, actually, like the experience of being on a Civil War battlefield? And partly that's because of the sacrifices made by the storyteller here and their generation. So So it became a research project and a project of cartooning. How do I draw something I don't even have a picture of, or I don't even have a sense of, and going from the text itself in the diary.
And unlike the book that you were working on with the Vermont Center's choice, in this one, you're telling the story of someone who's no longer living. What was that like for you, and how closely did you stick with what he wrote?
Right, yeah, I should say, yeah, like the El Viaje project, this is a project with many, many collaborators. It's just, I happen to be the only living collaborator with this project. With Freeman Colby, I immediately got the sense that he had a sense of purpose in telling his story. He wanted to get his story down because he had seen things that when he came back to New Hampshire from being down in Virginia and Washington, D.C. in the middle of the Civil War, I had the sense he came back to New Hampshire and nobody understood what he had seen, and he wanted to communicate something of that. He wanted to communicate it with a sense of justice, why he went to the war and why he stayed through the whole war and why he did the things he did, a sense of witness of some of all the different types of people he met and all the different voices that he encountered, and I think a sense of humor too. He really tells a lot of stories and kind of gets you laughing at the right places. He was a good storyteller. So I thought, boy, this is a good collaborator to work with. And my approach was just, since he's not here to comment on my work, I'm just going to stick to his text. In volume one, this was in volume one, I just stuck to his text, and every panel in the book has the text from his diary. So you're basically reading his diary, and I'm drawing comics around it and doing the research to figure out, when he mentions places and people, what did they look like? If I can track down anything that helps me draw them, I draw them, and I draw them in a stick figure style, because thinking I want to be responsible to the history. I don't want to draw something that wasn't there, or I don't want to leave something out that's important. So I want to get just the key details that I think that seem most important to the story. So that's volume one. And then I finished the first book, and I had drawn the whole diary, but it's only the first 9 months of his 3-year service.
Wow.
And I realized what happened was he sort of wrote this diary. It's a memoir, really. He wrote it down years after the war from his letters, and he died before he could complete it. But after I finished the book, I got this big, thick envelope in the mail from his great-great-grandchildren and great-nephews and nieces. And they said, hey, here's some letters the family has. We thought you might be interested in it. And that's when I realized, oh, there's going to be a volume 2. I can do the work of piecing together the little scraps of details in the letters. And I don't have Freeman Colby as an actual guide to his story anymore. But that turned out even better, because, I think of it like if you're taking a tour and you're on a bus and the tour guide with the microphone is pointing things to look at, that's great, right? You're going to get to know the place. But the moment they stop the bus and open the doors and just send you out into the neighborhoods, you're going to get to know it in a totally different way, right? You're going to meet people suddenly on the street, and you can ask questions and you can poke around and go through doors the tour guide might not have shown you. So I'm just finishing up volume 3 this summer. And each new book, it kind of grows in a different direction, and I bring in other storytellers to fill in all the gaps, because all we have are just a few letters.
Well, that's fascinating. What a wonderful process for you. One last question, Marek. What was the most surprising thing you learned from working on this book, on this series so far?
I think, well, the first thing that comes to mind, this came out in volume 3, and it really became a theme in volume 3, is literacy and the thirst for literacy. Volume 3 takes place in the first 5 months of 1864. So the winter right up to the first battles of the Wilderness and Spotsylvania Courthouse, as just when you thought the war couldn't get any worse, or any more intense, it does. And all through those months, a common theme in the camps and the hospitals and the refugee communities and the towns back in New Hampshire, all the settings of the letters and diaries that I'm using, they're all mentioning learning to read in some way, whether it's Freeman Colby's younger sisters going to a new school in New Hampshire and he's checking in the letters, to the formerly enslaved people and the families in the refugee communities all around Washington, D.C. have escaped from slavery. And one of the first things they want to do is start a school so that the kids can go to school. And the nurses in the hospitals, they want to keep their patients with a positive mindset on the healing process. And so they go around and collect all the teachers who are patients in the hospital and get them teaching classes. So these Union soldiers from all different backgrounds who never learned to read on the farm or in slavery, they get to start learning to read. And Freeman Colby was part of that process, being a school teacher who was in the hospital as a patient. He's involved in teaching Union soldiers from the North. He gets involved in teaching to a group that wants to do Bible study, a group of formerly enslaved hospital stewards who want to do Bible study. The men back in his army camp are all at first forced to take literacy classes against their will because they don't value it coming from their backgrounds in the North, but they quickly learn how powerful that is. So I was impressed by that. I kind of expected a lot more running around and shooting in the Civil War, and it turns out there's actually a lot of classes and helping each other read and them writing and using those literacy skills to communicate and share their story. And that's why we have these stories today as they were written down.
That surprises me. That's really interesting. And it's great to hear that. So Marek, thank you for talking with us about the book and also the book selected by the Vermont Center. It's really interesting to get a glimpse into what the process has been like for you to give voice to others' life experiences, both in words and also visually. So thank you. Well, I am afraid that this is the end of our time together. Lizzy, Daniel, and Marek, I just want to thank you so much for giving us your time, sharing your books with us, and for all you shared about the process of working on them. Thank you so much. You know, your books are a gift to all of us. They offer us ways into seeing how we can build and celebrate community with your book, Lizzy, how we can help people whose stories are not often told to be heard and told with everybody's books here. How we can dig deeper into the links between something that seems as simple as a color into delving into people's history and the history of our culture and the deeper meanings that a color can have aside from just being a pigment, but to be an emotion and to have such a great influence on culture. There is so much more to talk about with these books, but that is where everyone who is viewing this video comes in. I really encourage you to read the books, share them with others, and then to take the next step and talk about them together. Books are wonderful when read alone, and they are also tremendous and maybe even truly become more alive when you read them and share them together. That is a simple and powerful way that books can bring us together. So again, from Vermont, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine, we are so happy to have you join us, and we hope that you will view the videos from the other centers for the book. Thank you so much to the authors and illustrators, and thank you to you for watching. Bye-bye.
Learn more about the books, authors, and illustrators. Find Connecticut author and illustrator Lizzy Rockwell at lizzyrockwell.com. Find New Hampshire and Vermont author, editor, and cartoonist Marek Bennett at marekbennett.com. And find Maine illustrator Daniel Minter at danielminter.net. See all these state centers for the book have to offer. Find Maine at mainehumanities.org. Find New Hampshire at nh.gov/NHSL/Book Center. Find Vermont at vermonthumanities.org, and find Connecticut at ctcenterforthebook.org.